One of the strangest things about life is this. The more you ask it to hold still, the more you begin to feel it trembling in your hands. Try something very simple. Hold out your hand and tell it to be perfectly still. Not mostly still, completely still. And after a moment, you'll notice the tiny shake. The harder you try, the more obvious it becomes. And that is a rather wonderful little picture of the whole human problem. Because the more you demand stability, the more things shake. We spend so much of our lives trying to make everything feel solid. We want our relationships to feel secure, our future to feel predictable, our identity to feel clear, our emotions to stay manageable, our world to stop surprising us. We want some firm place to stand, something that won't move, something we can trust not to slip away. But life was never built that way. Life is not a wall. It is not a statue. It is much more like water, or music, or flame. It moves by its very nature. Your heart beats by pulsing. Your lungs breathe by expanding and releasing. Trees grow because they sway. Waves are waves because they never hold their shape. And yet we keep asking life to behave as if peace means stillness, as if safety means nothing changes, as if wisdom means becoming somehow untouched by the movement of things. But that kind of stillness is not peace. It is tension. Think of riding a bicycle. Nobody balances by becoming rigid. The moment you stiffen, the moment you grip too hard, the moment your whole body says, "I must not wobble," you lose the very balance you were trying to keep. Balance comes through movement, tiny adjustments, a kind of cooperation with instability. And really, life is much the same. The trouble begins when we start treating uncertainty as a mistake, a change in someone's tone, a delay in the plan, a strange feeling in the chest, a season of not knowing. And immediately the mind says, "This is bad. Something is wrong. I need to fix this before I can relax." So we tighten, we monitor, we analyze, we brace ourselves. And then, of course, everything feels even more fragile. Because the shaking is no longer just the natural movement of life. Now it is mixed with resistance. And resistance has a way of turning a passing wave into a crisis. This is what happens in love so often. The moment you say, "I need this never to change," fear has already entered the room. Now you begin to watch it too closely. You ask for reassurance. You test the atmosphere. You become less interested in loving and more interested in securing. But love is alive, and anything alive breathes. It comes close, it opens, it shifts, it deepens, it surprises. The moment you try to pin it down so that it can no longer move, you start draining the life out of it. The same thing happens with the self. We want to know exactly who we are. We want a finished identity, a settled conclusion, a clean answer. But perhaps that is why so many people feel inwardly strained, because they are trying to turn a living process into a fixed object. You are not a finished thing. You are not a definition. You are something happening, something flowing, something changing shape moment by moment. And that is not a flaw. That is your nature. But the mind imagines a little controller somewhere inside, a serious little manager who ought to be in charge of everything. He ought to know where life is going. He ought to make sure nothing falls apart. He ought to prevent pain, prevent embarrassment, prevent loss, prevent confusion. And the more power we give to this little inner manager, the more anxious we become. because he has accepted an impossible job. He is trying to control a river by clenching his fist, and that only makes him tired. You can see the absurdity of it in simple things. A cat walking along a fence does not seem to be thinking, "I must remain stable at all costs." It moves with ease because it is not divided against itself. But a human being, standing on that same fence, begins thinking about falling, then imagining falling, then fearing the humiliation of falling, and soon becomes so tense that the body can no longer do what it already knew how to do. That is the real trouble. We do not simply feel the shake. We add a story to it. We say, "This trembling means I'm failing. This uncertainty means I'm lost. This change means something has gone wrong." But what if it means nothing of the kind? What if the shaking is not proof that life is broken, but proof that life is alive? After all, leaves tremble because they are alive. Flames flicker because they burn. Water ripples because it moves. A heart trembles because it is open. And perhaps the person who demands a life without trembling is really asking for a life without aliveness. That is why the search for perfect stability becomes so exhausting. It asks from life what only dead things can provide: total stillness, total certainty, total control. But peace was never going to come from freezing the moment. Peace is much closer to learning how to move with it, like listening to music. You cannot possess music by holding on to one note. The beauty is in the movement, the passing, the unfolding. And life is like that. The joy of it, the mystery of it, even the tenderness of it, all belong to things that do not stay. A sunset is beautiful because it fades. A conversation is precious because it cannot be repeated exactly. Even the most ordinary moment becomes luminous when you stop trying to trap it and simply let it be what it is. So perhaps the real question is not, how do I make life more stable? Perhaps the real question is, can I stop fighting the fact that it moves? That changes everything. Because then uncertainty is no longer an enemy. It becomes part of the rhythm. You stop asking the future to reassure you before you agree to live. You stop waiting for some final moment when everything feels guaranteed and safe and settled. You begin to see that this moment, with all its incompleteness, is already life. Not a prelude to life, not a waiting room. Life itself. And yes, that means there will be vulnerability. Love will remain vulnerable. The future will remain unwritten. Your heart will remain sensitive. And time will keep changing everything it touches. But that is not cruelty. That is the dance. The river flows, the seasons turn, the moon changes shape. And none of this is a betrayal. It is simply the way living things live. Maybe that is why so many moments of instability are also moments of revelation. When the old plan falls apart, when the old role no longer fits, when the old certainty begins to crack, something else appears. Something quieter, something truer. You begin to notice how much of your suffering came not from change itself, but from demanding that change should not happen. And there is a kind of freedom in seeing that. You no longer have to stabilize the whole universe in order to feel at home in it. You no longer have to become unshakable. You only have to become a little less afraid of the shaking, a little softer, a little more open, a little less determined to hold the world still. Then a different kind of peace begins to appear. Not the peace of control, not the peace of certainty, something deeper than that. The peace of participation, the peace of realizing that you were never separate from the movement in the first place. You are not standing outside the river trying to manage it. You are part of the river. You are part of the music. You are part of this strange, moving, shimmering dance. So when things begin to shake,
Maybe there is no need to panic so quickly. Maybe there is no need to ask, how do I stop this? Maybe it is enough for once to pause and listen. Because the shaking may not be a sign that life is falling apart. It may be life asking you to loosen your grip, to breathe, to trust a little more, to stop turning movement into danger. And perhaps that is where real ease begins. Not when the world finally becomes stable, but when you no longer need it to.